Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, in today for Sean Spruce. The U.S. Supreme Court's decision to allow so-called conversion therapy is the latest legal and policy victory for a growing movement to limit support and recognition for gay, lesbian, and trans Native Americans. Conversion therapy opponents point to statistics that suggest compelling young people to go against their sexual orientation puts their mental health at risk. We'll look at the political landscape following the Supreme Court ruling on the next Native America Calling.
This is National Native News. I'm Jill Freitas. Judge Sharon Gleason dismissed a federal class action lawsuit filed against the Alaska Office of Children's Services last week. The lawsuit was brought by a national nonprofit working for foster care reforms. Attorneys for the organization alleged Alaska foster children are at risk of harm because of systematic problems that violated federal laws, including the Americans with Disabilities Act and federal child welfare protections. They pointed to high caseloads for caseworkers and an inadequate hiring and training process. About 2/3 of the kids in out-of-home care in the state are Alaska Native. But Gleason wrote that the attorneys didn't prove that any of the foster youth represented were actually harmed. Gleason also questioned the reliability of the evidence presented. Marcia Lowry is attorney and executive director of A Better Childhood, which brought the suit. She called the dismissal quite disappointing.
We did do a trial that involved a lot of evidence that I think was largely undisputed about how high the caseloads are in Alaska, about the lack of placement resources for children, about the failure to basically make attempts to remedy that situation.
She says a lot of children in Alaska are not getting benefits they're entitled to under federal law. Lowry says A Better Childhood is not sure yet of its next steps, but is considering an appeal.
We have seen dysfunctional child welfare systems really change and provide good services to kids, but we have seen that only as a result of litigation.
The Office of Children's Services declined an interview for the story. In a written statement, they said they're pleased with the court's decision and the verdict is an opportunity for the office to continue advancing its work. This story was provided by Alaska Public Media's Rachel Cassandra. Last week, the U.S. Supreme Court spent 2 hours hearing a landmark case that could upend birthright citizenship. A 19th century ruling on the citizenship of tribal members was at the heart of the Trump administration's defense. KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrozio has this report.
This was the exchange during oral arguments when Justice Neil Gorsuch pressed Solicitor General John Sauer, who presented the government's case.
Yes. So if a tribal Indian, for example, gives up allegiance to...
Born today, birthright citizens.
I think so on our test. Yeah, if they're lawfully domiciled here.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I have to think that through, but that's my reaction.
I'll take the yes. That's all right.
In an 1884 majority decision, the justices ruled John Elk, a Winnebago man living in Omaha, was not a U.S. citizen, in spite of the 14th Amendment codifying birthright citizenship.
My mother was probably not a United States citizen when she was born in 1923 in Oklahoma.
Bob Miller, who is Eastern Shawnee and with ASU's Indian Legal Clinic, has been teaching this very precedent of Elk versus Wilkins for 3 decades now.
I disagree completely with the argument that that's analogous to undocumented immigrants and them having children here.
For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrozio.
And I'm Jill Freitas.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support from Rodale, publisher of A Feather and a Fork, 125 intertribal dishes from an indigenous food warrior by Crystal Wapipa with Amy Page Condon, and a foreword by Tommy Orange is now available for purchase wherever books are sold. Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, sitting in for Sean Spruce. The U.S. Supreme Court just struck down a state ban on conversion therapy, a wide range of controversial practices aimed at changing a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. The American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association are among a long list of professional organizations that reject the practice as potentially harmful and unethical. The decision marks the latest in a number of Supreme Court rulings involving LGBTQ and Two-Spirit issues. Today on our show, we'll hear from Native LGBTQ plus advocates on the status and trends of these legal issues. Join us with a comment or question by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. You can also leave a comment on our website, nativeamericacalling.com, and on our social media pages. Joining us now in the studio is Maddie Jim. Maddie is a Native transgender advocate and is Dene. Welcome back to Native America Calling, Maddie.
Hi, good afternoon.
Also joining us in the studio here is Lenny Hayes. Lenny is the owner and executive director of Tate Topa Consulting LLC. They are a citizen of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. Welcome back to Native America Calling, Lenny.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And joining us from St. Paul, Minnesota is State Representative Leash Kozlowski. They are the first non-binary two-spirit person elected to the Minnesota State Legislature. They are a citizen of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Welcome to Native America Calling, Representative Kozlowski. And joining us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is Shelby Chestnut. They are the executive director of the Transgender Law Center. They're Assiniboine. Welcome to Native America Calling, Shelby.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, Shelby, I want to start with you. Most advocates look at the Supreme Court's ruling on conversion therapy bans as a step backward. What can you tell us about what conversion therapy is and what this decision means broadly?
Yeah, I think for me, when we look at the court's ruling from last week, the court treated the Colorado law as regulating what therapists say in sessions as a restriction on speech. So ultimately, they applied the strictest measurement of the First Amendment standards. I do think what's important to note, while last week was a hard decision for many in our community and sets a hard sort of path ahead, the case now goes back to lower courts for further review. But I do think the case creates a little bit of legal uncertainty for states and the protections that states might have as courts re-examine laws that limit harmful practices. And so I think, for decades, we've worked to limit the reach of conversion therapy. But I do think that this is sort of opening up unfortunately, an experience where young people could be targeted, where families could be targeted. And I think, at the end of the day, all of us deserve to live and thrive and be our authentic selves. And the Supreme Court decision sought to determine whether licensed practitioners can subject young people to these dangerous so-called conversion therapy practices and try and change whether it's their sexual orientation or their gender identity. But I do think what we've seen is just an outcry of young people saying, like, we are not going to let this stand and we're going to see it fought out in the lower courts. So I do think folks need to understand that it does go back to the lower courts. It's not a complete and total loss.
All right. I want to go back to Minnesota State Representative Leash Kozlowski. Minnesota has a ban on conversion therapy. How will the court's ruling affect that ban? And does this call into question other states' bans on the practice?
Right. For us, it was a terrible day for LGBTQ youth and families, Two-Spirit people across Minnesota when we saw this be struck down. But very clearly, Minnesota's law still stands, but agree that this does weaken protections and invites further legal challenges. But even with this decision, we have really strong protections and grateful to live in a state with our people's attorney general and a governor who are going to continue to not back down and make sure that we're protecting queer folks and Two-Spirit folks. That looks like looking at how do we make sure that our law that says you can't use taxpayer dollars to fund conversion therapy, you can't falsely advertise conversion therapy, and licensing boards that can still discipline or even revoke licenses for these harmful practices. Some of the things that we're looking at the legislature this session is also blocking insurance from covering conversion therapy and creating pathways for survivors to seek justice by remedy for damages. We know that this is not therapy, that it's harmful and powerfully discredited, and we're going to continue to strengthen our protections in the face of these challenges.
Okay. And you released a statement after the U.S. Supreme Court ruling striking down Colorado's ban on conversion therapy. Why is this issue important to you?
Yeah, one of the very first things that this administration did when they took office was try to say that there are only two sexes. And as a trans, non-binary, very proud Two-Spirit person, we know that we've existed since time immemorial. And our communities have been the first to be erased and gender-sided, through boarding schools and lavender scares, and now, again, trying to force us back into the closet to remove us from public life. And at a time where I really believe that Two-Spirits are having a resurgence, that we're stepping back into the powwow circle for our Native youth to see a future, for our Native youth to be able to become youth and adults and ancestors. Right now, their future and present includes higher rates of depression and suicide, which we know that conversion therapy leads to more isolation, more mental harm, more physical harm. And so we want to make sure that Minnesota, that this country is continuing to treat Two-Spirits and gender-expansive people as the medicine that we are. And that means that we have to stand up for all kids, including trans and Two-Spirit youth.
We're seeing other states pass bills restricting gender-affirming care for transgender youth, and they're also revising their definitions of gender and sex. What do you make of this trend across the country, and what position does the Minnesota State Legislature take on LGBTQ plus issues?
The topic of our times, at a time when trans folks are being used as political fodder, as punching bags in every direction, that Minnesota has held up with strong bipartisan leadership in protecting LGBTQ2S people, especially our young people, as I mentioned. And, you know, this is really about safety, dignity, and basic human rights. And in the same way that, you know, immigrants are not the reason you can't afford a home, poor folks are not the reason that we don't have health care, and trans folks are not the reason that folks cannot afford their lives. And we know that there are folks who are funding a campaign against us. You know, recently the authors of Project 2025 said gender-affirming care is bad for all people of all ages, which is absolutely wrong, couldn't be further from the truth, and their solution is you outlaw it. And so in Minnesota, we are doing everything possible to continue to protect gender-affirming care for youth as well as for adults, including gender-affirming wear. We've seen attacks on trans folks who are incarcerated to ICE detention, with Operation Metro Surge here in Minnesota. But we've made gains to make sure that gender-affirming care is covered by insurance, that we have the trans refuge law, that we're going to hold firm to our promise for folks who are fleeing their own home states. We've got the Rainbow Railroad from the States to Canada. And so, again, just at this time where it feels like the whole world is against us, we know that the reality is that the public are with us, that over 85% of people believe that trans and two-spirit folks deserve the same rights as anybody else. And frankly, that we just want folks to leave us alone and to celebrate and honor us as the medicine and the healers that we are.
All right, we have just a little less than a minute here before we go to the break, but you're currently the only two-spirit official serving in elected office in the nation. What are your interactions like with your colleagues?
Oh, yeah, thanks for that question. When I found out that I was the only one, I keep telling everybody it kind of felt like on the Titanic when you're calling out, hello, is anybody out there? And I will say that there is this beautiful community of two-spirits in Minnesota that are really just my lifeboat. And it is incredibly challenging when you're both a Native person. I'm also Mexican-American, and then the first trans non-binary two-spirit person. And so you have to do a lot of education in order to help folks understand us. Once they get to know two-spirits and trans folks, we're really excited, and I love to be trans and two-spirit, and for folks to see just that we are like the template of how to live your life in full, living, radiant color. But sometimes that always doesn't translate to how our colleagues or even just the spaces are set up. For example, not being able to have a restroom just the same as every other colleague, to being misgendered and dead named, all of those things. Also within our tribal communities, I think, we have more work to do to really decolonize ourselves from the gender binaries that were put on us. And
Got it.
Like I said, to be able to uphold and honor two-spirits.
All right. Well, we'll be back with our guests right after this break. Eleven Alaska Native children were taken from their remote island homes to the Carlisle Indian Boarding School in Pennsylvania more than a century ago. 2 of those students died at Carlisle. Kodiak's Alutiiq Museum documents the lives of these students and the recent efforts to bring their remains home. We'll hear more about it on the next Native America Calling.
Who protects Indian country? Amerind does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerind helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerind is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, and we're discussing legal and legislative trends on LGBTQ+ issues. We're joined today by Native advocates on the implications of various U.S. Supreme Court rulings and state bills on the Native LGBTQ+ community. You can join our discussion with your comments or questions by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. I want to go to our guest over in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have Shelby Chestnut. They are the executive director of the Transgender Law Center. Shelby, do you see the U.S. Supreme Court decisions on these cases reflective of the attitudes of many people in the country right now?
That's a great question, and I think the simple answer is no. I think earlier in the show we heard some statistics on how many people support transgender people. And the reality of it is that a majority of Americans support transgender people. And I think it's a moment, too, where the Supreme Court should be understanding the long-term consequences of ruling against medical decisions, against sporting agencies, against, medical providers, and trying to limit trans people's access to health care, ability to go to school safely, just participate in daily lives. And I think the ways that, opposition has used our communities, trans Two-Spirit communities, as sort of a pawn is absolutely right. The ways that the world right now is unaffordable is not because we have special health care, it's because we need health care like everyone else. And I think the more that we can break down those myths and just articulate that, I think on the other side, too, you're just seeing more and more people standing alongside transgender people and saying, we are united as a community, and what impacts immigrant communities impacts trans and Two-Spirit communities, but also impacts Native communities, impacts Black and Brown communities. And how do we link sort of all of our work together to really sort of stand up and say, we're united as a community, so you have to start taking our issues serious together in a more collective way.
Okay, so the decision had considerable support among the justices who ruled those who participate in conversion therapy have a free speech protection. Should the opponents of conversion therapy have tried a different tact, and is there room to reverse things now?
I think the thing, and I lifted it up earlier in the segment, but I think for me the thing that's important to highlight is right now the case goes back to lower courts, and how important it is for states that do have protections to speak up loudly about why they have those protections and why as a city, as a state, as a totality of their government decided on those things. And why we now need to make sure that those states that have those protections continue to have those protections. And, the reality of it is we are looking at a divided map of this country. There's places where it is safer to be a transgender young person. There's places where it is a very hostile experience to be those identities. But I do think, we need to start listening to what, professionals are saying around these matters. And the American Medical Association, medical boards across the board are saying this is a very harmful practice. So I don't know why we would be doing something like that to harm young people in a moment like this.
Right. Well, maybe you just answered this question, but I want to ask, since the start of the year, the Supreme Court has made several rulings on LGBTQ2 issues. Is there a way to sum up any kind of trend there?
I think that we are dealing with a very challenging environment when it comes to the Supreme Court. And I think this was many decades in the making to have a majority block of conservative justices. And I think that we need to continue to educate lawmakers and courts around what are the issues that they should be supporting, what are the issues that they need to better understand. Because again, I think, a majority of Americans support transgender people, but I think even within that, people need some support in better understanding what it means to make sure that trans people of all ages have access to health care, can go to school safely, can be in employment and have jobs safely, etc. So I think the more that we can do to sort of educate people, the more we can then push the public conversation. So it makes it that much harder, whether it's at the Supreme Court or at the state court level, to have decisions on issues impacting our life that will have negative consequences.
In Montana, a bill will revise the state's definitions of male, female, sex, and gender. For example, the term gender will be synonymous with a person's biological sex. Other states have emphasized binary definitions of gender as well. How important is this issue to groups like yours?
It's really important. I think for a long time, we've known that gender is not singular and it is expansive, whether that is, non-binary identities, two-spirit identities. Throughout time immemorial, gender has not been a binary structure, and I think we will continue to push sort of policies and education that make sure that that's known to people. And I will say for me, to the Montana lawmakers that are listening, as a transgender Native person from Montana, I'm here to tell you that my sex is certainly not biological in that way, and my gender has evolved over time. And I'm grateful to the people in a place like Montana who made it so I could change my birth certificate to have proper identification. And I think when you start to restrict your state from having these sorts of things in place, you'll see that people are unable to stay there, unable to return there, and unable to feel safe. So it's really a call to action for lawmakers to listen to their constituents.
The court is also reviewing challenges to state bans prohibiting transgender girls from participating in school sports. And it seems like the court will uphold these bans. What are the greater implications if that happens?
I think for me, something I try and remember is what is more American than people playing sports? And that's all genders, all ages. And I think for me, what these policies and these rulings have the precedent to do is to further exclude transgender people from public life. But at the same time, we need to understand that we're in all aspects of public life. We have a wide range of people, even on this call today. We have people that are elected officials in their state. We have people leading organizations. We have people working in the public health sector, being a community organizer. We are in every aspect of public life, whether state lawmakers or Supreme Courts or state courts want to rule against us. We're here to stay. We're more powerful than we've ever been. The number of trans people standing up to have their voices heard is something I'd never imagined seeing in my lifetime. So I'm just really hopeful with the ways that I'm seeing transgender leadership sort of take front and center of the political debate, even when they want to say negative things about us and make decisions about our lives that will have real life consequences.
All right. South Dakota just passed a resolution demanding the Supreme Court overturn marriage equality. Is that prior court ruling vulnerable right now?
I think that lawmakers should focus on the real world issues in their cities and in their towns and in their states. And we know marriage to be the law of the land, and that's not going to change.
Okay. All right, I want to go to Lenny right now. Lenny Hayes is with us here in the studio, and Lenny is the owner and executive director of Tate Topa Consulting, LLC. What is your understanding of how conversion therapy typically works?
So, I'll give you a little bit of my background. I am a mental and chemical health therapist specializing in marriage family therapy and have 16 years experience working within Native communities, specifically Native population, but also youth and adults who identify as Two-Spirit or Native LGBTQ+. I have never worked outside of Native community. I've always worked within community. So one of the things that I know about conversion therapy is that the goal is to change the sexual orientation of an individual, which only causes a lot of harm. What I know of with conversion therapy is I have not heard of any Native practitioner who has used that type of therapy with any of our Native youth who identify. But I know that it causes great harm in many, many ways, with, as we know, Trevor Project, I believe, came out with a specific data on youth who identify with high rates of suicide, and with the highest being Native American population, which really just blew me out of the water. And it really hurt my own spirit knowing that our young people are taking their lives because of how they identify. So what I know of conversion therapy is that it causes a lot of harm with anxiety, depression, and so many other issues.
All right. So it sounds like there hasn't been any kind of research on conversion therapy and how it affects Native LGBTQ plus and Two-Spirit youth. What would that research look like, and how needed is it right now?
Are you asking like the impact of it on an individual who identifies?
Yeah, well, what would the impact be of research that actually focused on Native LGBTQ youth and conversion therapy?
Well, I think the American Psychological Association already came up with that understanding that it is an ineffective type of therapy, and again, just causes harm. So there's really no, overall, any research that it's effective.
Okay. And what are your colleagues saying about this ban getting struck down?
Well, I think, like anyone else who identifies, I think we're all fearful. I mean, even with what the current administration has done and how it's really impacted overall everyone who identifies, especially our youth and even within our Native community. And what I know about within our Native community is that all of our, Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ leaders have worked tremendously hard to educate and bring awareness of all the many issues that impacts individuals who identify throughout Indian country. And so, the reality of it is that because of what's happening, I think it just put a setback with us for 50 years because we've really worked hard to really get our families, our communities to really understand us. And the reality of it is, when it comes to Two-Spirit and Native LGBTQ plus people, before colonization, our identity was well honored, well respected, and well loved, and we all played major roles within our tribal communities. And the setback is that a lot of our families, our communities are sort of taking the words of the current administration in how they view the population. They're going back to old ideas. And we basically have to really, really work hard and just continue to bring, some healing and some understanding about individuals who identify, especially with our young people. And I really do want to do a shout out to my own relatives from the Oglala Sioux tribe, my Inan, Ate, Ethelene, and Rick Two Dogs, who really support youth who identify. So this summer I'll be a part of a 4-day Native healing camp for the Native youth. And they really support youth who identify as Two-Spirit or Native LGBTQ+.
Okay. I guess more on that topic, do you see any gains from your perspective with Native parents or guardians becoming more accepting of their child's sexuality?
Yes, I do. And I also understand, too, that there's some fallback from all these decisions that are being made by, our federal government, the Supreme Court, all of that. But I think, again, we have to go back to the idea that we are our own sovereign nations, and we need to do whatever we can to support anyone, especially our youth who identify as Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ+. So I do have to say that I'm also very proud of the Oglala Sioux tribe from South Dakota, who was actually the first tribe that allowed same-sex marriage, right? But one of the things that I know of is that even before colonization, our individuals who identified as Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ+, were already getting married. So we've been getting married for thousands of years, but yet we still have to follow, the federal government rules, whatever. So my hope is that we as Native communities across Indian country pull together to help support and continue to make changes within our own tribal communities when it comes to laws to protect also. there's a lot of our states that are a lot of our tribal communities that have not yet come up with tribal codes, especially when it comes to sexual violence or domestic violence, or even just any hate against Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people. So my hope is that what's going on, that we will continue to get the support that we need so that we can still create change within our tribal communities.
Okay. Most of the other cases that the U.S. Supreme Court is taking up involve gender-affirming care and transgender student sports. What are your thoughts on this trend to have states restrict this type of health care and young people's involvement in school sports?
Well, just like what everyone has said so far, basically I support everything that everyone is saying, but, for me, it's just I have a really difficult time even just specifically talking about transgender population. And the reason why is because I don't identify as trans, but I support, like leaders like Maddie and other leaders across the country who are really working hard to support the community. But I believe everyone should have a right to, especially our young people, to do what they feel, what they want. Especially, when it comes to mental health. We know that because of a lot of these big changes, a lot of our youth are being impacted with their mental health, with depression, anxiety, all of that.
All right. We'll be back after this break. You can join our conversation still by calling 1-800-996-2848.
Support by the Gathering of Nations Powwow. The last dance is this April 24th and 25th at Expo, New Mexico. Gone's last horse rider and regalia parade takes place at 4 p.m. both days. Tickets at gatheringofnations.com and at the gates.
Kaufman & Associates is a Native-owned and led consulting firm supporting Native communities with culturally grounded solutions to shape Indigenous futures. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
You're listening to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy. We're continuing our conversation with Native trans and Two-Spirit advocates on the U.S. Supreme Court decision and decisions, plural, and states' legislation involving LGBTQ plus issues. You can listen back to this show and past shows on our website, nativeamericacalling.com, and all major podcast platforms. You can also join our conversation right now by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. I want to go to our other guest here in the studio here in Albuquerque. We have Maddie Jim. She is a Native transgender advocate and is Diné. Maddie, how do you assess the progress that has been made in advocating for LGBTQ plus issues stacked against the recent resistance we're currently seeing from the Trump administration and its supporters?
So when I first heard about this, it kind of took me back. And the first thing I thought about was how this has taken us back decades. And I think that was my initial reaction at first. But after researching and reading different things that pertain to this issue, it kind of made me look at different things in a different way. So just even the word that they use with talk therapy, I kind of question, that's being used so lightly. So when I really think about it, and this is just my personal opinion, is that it gives a person to have free speech, to continue a hate where they can express that when there's actually proven evidence where conversion therapy is wrong. And it's been proven by APA, it has been proven by AMA, it has been proven by so many research articles. And for me, it seems like this is just something for somebody just to bring in their personal bias and to add on to practicing what they believe in rather than helping another person in situations. And with this conversion therapy, I know that we talked a lot about trans populations, but it does affect LGBTQ, two-spirit, questioning, queer, and so on. So for me, my concern is that somebody who's questioning their sexuality or their gender identity, how would this affect them if they came across somebody who was a therapist who wanted to enact their free speech and tell somebody, well, that's wrong, you can't do that, or we should change that and stuff. So if somebody's questioning that, it could bring harm to them. It could bring mental health issues that could exacerbate the depression, the anger, the self-hate, which could cause self-harm, because we know that's happened with generations of people who've gone through conversion therapy. And I know of some friends who said they've gone through conversion therapy who they attest to it doesn't work. And we know it doesn't work. So I think with this legislation or what's been going on in the ruling, that people are just trying to practice their personal biases in a way.
Mm. Would you say advocacy is more on the defense than it was before?
On the defense of the ruling or the defense of banning conversion therapy?
Just more on the defense of, the right to exist and to do what you want to do.
Yeah, like for me, I'm an adult and I'm happy as a Native trans woman. I'm on hormones, and what Shelby mentioned earlier is that I live in a state where my documentation affirms who I am in my being and me living. Even my health care, like gender-affirming health care, they're trying to ban that. But me taking hormones and me taking initiatives to live the way that I want to live, and if trans-affirming health care is a part of that, it's life-saving. It saved my life. I remember at a time when I was dealing with my alcoholism and I wanted to die because I didn't feel people accepted me for who I was. So at that young age, I'm like, okay, how does this affect me? And once I came out, went to a therapist who worked with Native populations in IHS and really worked on my identity and who I am, really helped. So that's trans-affirming healthcare, and it saved my life. And then later on, I started hormone therapy, which is part of trans-affirming healthcare. That saved my life. So for me, looking at conversion therapy, if somebody were to practice that, or if I had a therapist who said that it was wrong, that it would really make me question, like, do I really want to work with you or not? And then also, as somebody who's a service provider, isn't that imposing their ideals or ideas on somebody else rather than being client-centered or client-focused as to where we look at what the client wants rather than what a therapist or a service provider thinking what the client wants.
Okay. How about in Native communities? Has there been progress with tribal governments becoming more accepting of LGBTQ issues and rights?
I think that would vary within each tribal community. The word sovereignty comes into play because tribal communities utilize that, and a tribal community can enact laws or protocols or policies within their own communities. So like with the Navajo Nation, they have a ban on gay marriage, which I feel is not right also too. Like we should have the right to marry whoever we want to. So it all depends on the tribal community and how they enact these and how they look at providing these laws. And sometimes it could be detrimental. And with tribal communities, especially around conversion therapy, like how are they going to look at that? How are they going to look at providing services in IHS or Indian Health Services, especially with behavioral health? Because there are stories that I've heard decades ago where therapists were saying that, well, you're living the wrong lifestyle. But I think a lot of that has changed with the ethical boundaries that have been educated and talked about, that those ethical boundaries does keep people accountable. But with this decision, I think it's going to make it harder because it'll give them the free speech to practice what they feel, and it wouldn't be good on somebody who's coming in for services, such as like for me going into therapy, and it helped me a lot. So if somebody were to be told that, then I think that would be detrimental.
Okay. And I guess more on the future. What are your concerns going forward? Do you see more rulings like this, like the Supreme Court ruling on, Colorado's ban of conversion therapy? Do you see that more of those, coming down the line and affecting how you work and where you work?
Yeah, I feel that there's going to be more idiocy that's going to come up. I'm saying it that, like, that's my opinion, is that there's been a lot of decisions or stuff that's being done in an uneducated way. Like, I'm a Native trans woman who I feel is intelligent, smart. I've gone to school. I live my life. I'm independent. I come from a loving family. I'm an aunt. I'm a sister. I'm a grandmother. I practice my cultural and traditional teachings, and I have a lot of good things in me that a lot of these executive orders or a lot of these laws that are being enacted are saying differently. And it's unfortunate that people are believing that and wanting to support that. And some even coming from my own people. Like, how could you? Like, we've gone through decades of colonization and trauma and stuff, that this is still a part of that. This decision is a part of that. Native Americans were being tortured and not treated right, and that's conversion therapy. So we're practicing the same thing, so in a different sense. So for our own lateral oppression and lateral hate within our own tribal communities could be detrimental. So that's kind of concerning for me, is like, how are tribal communities going to see this? Are they going to listen to their people, or are they going to listen to outside entities?
All right. Lenny, you're sitting here kind of nodding your head. Is there anything else you'd like to say about this topic here?
Sure. I just wanted to do just sort of a follow-up to Maddie's question. One of the things that I've seen since this new current administration has come in regards to the federal funding cuts, a lot of our Native organizations that have supported Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ plus people are more or less told that if they support or even, help our community that identifies, that they would lose federal funding. So what I've seen is a lot of Native organizations wipe out anything that has to do with Native Two-Spirit on their websites, and which caused a lot of harm and a lot of worry and concern, but also broke a lot of our organizations' hearts, because in order for them to operate, they have to operate on that federal funding, right? And so for me as a consultant and doing a lot of violence prevention work, that really also hurts my work, because I'm a strong advocate. I've been doing this for 16 years, and a lot of my violence prevention work is not only just talking about this issue, but other issues like missing and murdered, sex and human trafficking. Last week I attended a webinar with the Missing and Exploited Children's Network in regards to child welfare. And it was astonishing to hear that sex trafficking in 2025 went up 300%. And when we ask that question, how much of that data is specific to Native population of individuals who identify, they can't answer that question because data is never specifically accurate, or they don't ask the right questions, right? So, because of all of this, it's really impacted our community. But I guess what I do want to say is that it's brought us together as leaders amongst across Indian country of individuals who identify, is that we come together much more stronger and really trying to support one another as much as we possibly can. So,
okay. All right. I want to go back to you, Maddie. 19 past laws restrict transgender people's bathroom use. How do you grapple with this ongoing issue with bathroom regulations and restrictions?
Oh my gosh. I've done a lot of trainings, and the first thing that pops into mind when you say that is that I tell people, people concentrate about what's between our legs rather than what's between our ears. And for restrooms, people just want to go to use the restroom. They either want to take a dump or they want to pee. And that's why they have bathroom stalls, to give privacy. Trans people are not going into the restroom to look at genitalia. They are not going in there to touch somebody or to to be a predator on somebody. We're going in there to use the restroom that we feel that aligns with our gender identity and who we are as a person. And it's pure hate that happens, and that's the things that we should be free to pee, basically. Mm-hmm. Simple, free to pee.
Yeah. Are there any other issues that you're concerned about outside of this issue that got us started today? Conversion therapy.
Yeah, I think we touched a little bit on it. Is the trans-affirming healthcare, especially for youth. Like it's been taken away like abruptly. No weaning off. No like coming off the medications, just abruptly stopping and not giving life-saving health care. Like for me, when I was younger, like I really didn't take hormones until I was older as an adult. Like if I had the choice of taking hormone therapy or doing hormone therapy when I was young, I would have jumped on those puberty blockers. I would look slamming today and stuff, but I'm happy that youth had the opportunity to do that, but that has been taken away. And it seems like with legislation or even just federal government that they've gone after the adult trans people, but they couldn't do nothing with us. But now they're going after the youth because they're more vulnerable. So they're making stupid decisions and taking away like life-saving health care that can help them. Like if somebody is going through like for me, like I didn't feel I was loved, but there is that health care or that mental health service that is helping young trans people who are identifying, or somebody who's just coming out who is identifying, it's helping them. So like they say, trans-affirming health care does work and it's life-saving. And we're going to continue to say that. And down the road, it's going to continue to be that. And these stupid laws, I hope we can just reverse them, get rid of them, because we know they're just stupid.
Okay. All right. I want to go back to our guest we have on the line in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Shelby Chestnut, the executive director of the Transgender Law Center. Shelby, we just heard from one Native non-binary lawmaker from Minnesota. How has visibility improved in LGBTQ plus communities among elected officials?
I mean, I think across the board, we're seeing, people from all walks of life entering public service. And I think it's amazing. Minnesota has led the way for the first Black trans elected officials. Andrea Jenkins, now retired. Philippe Cunningham served in public office for a term. We have Lee Finke. We have Representative Kozlowski. I probably pronounced their name wrong. But I think across the board, we're seeing, people of color, young people, trans people getting involved in sort of public elections and running for office. I think we need to see more of that. I think the thing I keep coming back to is, as much as we want to seek to criminalize and restrict and deny access for young people, we need to remember that those young people in very short time will be voting age, and I hope that they run for office. I hope they get involved in politics in ways that is much easier to do when you're 18 or older. So I think I'm just heartened, to see people saying, like, we need to start building the world that we deserve to be living in and running for office and getting involved in organizations. TLC is the first trans organization to sign on as a organizational endorser of the No Kings movement around the country, and just participated in the No Kings 3 work on March 28th. And, it's amazing to see in large numbers the amount of people coming out in rural areas and urban areas, in big towns, small towns, to say, like, these are the values that we hold as a community, and it includes transgender people.
All right. Well, we've reached the end of the hour here. I'd like to say thank you to our guests, Minnesota State Representative Leash Kozlowski, Shelby Chestnut, Lenny Hayes, and Maddie Jim.
Support from Davis Keelan Law Firm, a New Mexico firm standing with Native families suffering catastrophic loss. When tragedy strikes Indian country, Davis Keelan fights to restore stability, dignity, and justice, bringing a voice to Native families and communities for 20 years. More information, daviskeelan.com.
Tribal Development Partners believe strong infrastructure strengthens tribal sovereignty. Through the 105L lease program, TDP helps align federal funding systems with long-term tribal priorities. More at tribaldevpartners.com. Proud to support this show.
Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiver-resources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.